All right, welcome to the small business briefing. As you can see, class is in. I actually happen to be at the Special Olympics Athlete Training Center in Grand Rapids. I serve on the board of directors for Special Olympics Michigan. It's a big day, kicking off a campaign to purchase and refurbish the South Christian High School to be a world-class athlete training center. So a really cool day. But anyway, doing kind of on location today. Also, Rob is out. And so it'll be me flying solo, but I do have a guest, and it'll be a guest that you're well familiar with over the last 15 months since we've been doing this. So the first thing I want to mention is that there is a change in our sponsor, sort of. It's the same sponsor, but highlighting a different business. So regular viewers of the Small Business Briefing will know that Healthy Screen and Healthy Visitor is a long-term sponsor of this program. Many of you watching use Healthy Screen and Healthy Visitor. We've heard from you. SBAM used Healthy Screen and Healthy Visitor as well. And it was to remain compliant with MyOSHA requirements related to employee and visitor health screening questionnaires. The creator of Health Screen and Healthy Visitor is a long-term supporter of SBAM named Marana Group. And I'll give you a little bit of commentary on the owner of Marana Group in just a few minutes. But Marana Group is a data and document and distribution solutions company headquartered in Kalamazoo. So like many of our members, they quickly developed new solutions last year to help their customers navigate the pandemic and the workplace restrictions. While the need for those tools has waned and are now coming to an end, we are absolutely thrilled that Marana Group has agreed to become and continue to be a sponsor of the Small Business Briefing. So you can learn more about that Marana Group at visiting their website, maranagroup.com, M-A-R-A-N-A-G-R-O-U-P, maranagroup.com. So a little bit of commentary. David Roy, who owns Marana Group, also a former chair of the SBAM Board of Directors. If you have utilized our templates, or you watch this briefing, or you read our articles, and just so many different aspects, David helps us think through things in the potential issues, consequences, follow-up questions, develops really innovative templates and tools that can be transferred and shared with the greater small business community. If you've used one of those from us, chances are that it was made either directly or in partnership with David Roy. So David, thank you for your ongoing support of the Small Business Briefing and the Small Business Association of Michigan. So I have I'd mentioned before that we have a guest today, and that guest is Sean Egan. And Sean is from the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department. One of the areas of the department that he oversees is MyOSHA. So Sean, thanks for joining us again. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much for having me back, Brian. I hope that means good things. And certainly I would just like to thank you and SBAM for the great continued partnership throughout this crisis. I think while certainly maybe your members don't know, your issues are heard. While they may not always come out the way that you had hoped, we're definitely listening, and SBAM and Brian and Rob and Sarah have been just wonderful partners throughout this, including helping us run and administer a grant program last fall for winterization of around $3 million that we couldn't have done without them. So just thank you so much, Brian, for always being accessible and available, and inviting me and others to participate on these briefings.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. You know, just the other day I had lunch on Washington Square at Kewpie's, and was sitting in the furniture outside, and that was one of the grant recipients. It's kind of cool to see that come awesome. Around full circle. Well, yeah, thanks, Sean. And we have appreciated the accessibility, the responsiveness, your willingness to come on here, even when when you know we're going to kind of grill you, and you still come on the show. So we appreciate that. So let's talk. It's a big week. So we had the epidemic emergency orders that ended on Tuesday, and right on the heels of that was the rescission of the MyOSHA emergency workplace safety rules. So the first thing is maybe to acknowledge that we had been advocating for that. We do appreciate that you that you and Susan Corbin and the team there had really taken to heart our concerns with having COVID-specific workplace safety rules after the expiration date of the epidemic emergency order. And we know that you heard and responded to it. But I wanted to get a sense for what you expect the relationship with employers to be moving forward. I mean, the role of the agency changed quite a bit. What should an employer expect in terms of engagement? When would an employer hear from MIOSHA going forward?
Absolutely. I think one note there, and I'm sure that some of SBAN members are in the healthcare setting. We did update to come in alignment with federal OSHA, who did issue a rule specific for healthcare settings. Happy to take questions on that, but speaking more broadly to the non-healthcare community, as you all know, employers always have an obligation to have a safe workplace, and COVID still does present some challenges. So we're strongly encouraging and coaching employers to continue to follow and look at those CDC guidelines. We'll be continuing to do some updates to try to support you in that as well. But employees have rights, right? They have the right to file a complaint, and MIOSHA has an obligation to respond to those complaints. And whether it's COVID related or something else in your particular workplace, they're going to respond to that. And they're going to talk with employers across the state of Michigan, something we've been doing throughout the crisis, and really looking to make sure that those workplaces are safe. So as long as you're being mindful, call it the common sense approach, right? You know that COVID exists. You know that a large percentage of the workforce is not yet vaccinated. So it could still be a risk in your environment. And if you're following those strategies, keeping people out when they don't feel well, you can continue to do health screenings if you choose to. You can continue to do masking if you choose to. You're depending on how you feel you need to set up your workplace to keep it safe and help prevent the transmission of COVID. You're going to be fine. Certainly, when we look at how we have these discussions, we'll continue to be out doing consultations. We'll still have the hotline to help you, and we'll still be talking with employers as we move forward. And we've been saying we're at the end of the tunnel. Like, we're still in the tunnel, right? We're not quite to the end, but we're still a little ways in the tunnel as it relates to getting people vaccinated. So be mindful of that in your workplace, and we'll try to keep you updated the best that we can as things change too.
Yeah, I think that's you had mentioned the idea of, people being sick in the workplace. And while health screening as a specific practice is not something that any rule requires, an example of something that a policy that SBAM has and will carry into the future that is maybe more important and perhaps an answer to how should we mitigate this risk? How should we deal with this obligation to have a safe work environment moving forward? Is that when people are sick, they can't come into the office. Either they work remotely or it's time away from work. There might be some work environments where a person can work in isolation, but the idea is that an employer saying to an employee, "Hey, you're sick, you still got to come in." Is an example of kind of a reckless disregard for an obligation to provide a safe and work environment for the rest of the employees. So maybe touch a little bit on this clause of general duty. So employees have a general duty obligation. What would be now that the rules aren't in place? Let's say a complaint comes in from an employee. The department is obligated to follow up on that complaint. Usually, I think you guys make a phone call first and a conversation with the employer. So at that time, you're asking a series of questions. But what's the measuring stick at that point that a complaint might be measured against?
Yeah, so general duty is a term that has been in the law since it was created. Federal OSHA was established workplace safety across the country, and then we have a state plan which follows suit. So in 1975, when we started MIOSHA, our state plan, we have that same provision, and it's a basic overlay of all of the standards, and that an employer has an obligation to provide a workplace that's free from recognized hazards that are or likely to cause serious injury or death. And there are 4 key components. One, that a hazard exists. I think we would all agree that COVID is a hazard. that can be in our workplace, that the employer has knowledge of it, that there are feasible abatement methods. So when we think about what does feasible abatement mean, that's going to be those things like Brian mentioned on keeping those policies in place that sick employees don't come in, making sure they alert you to whether or not they have symptoms and those types of things. So the hardest thing to do, Brian, is to say if X, then Y when it comes to general duty, but it's just that, it's a general duty. So if you're putting in some practices that try to make sure that COVID stays out of the workplace or it gets out of the workplace, that you're doing some of that enhanced cleaning after there's a positive in your workplace, heaven forbid, you're going to be good there. It's really looking at those pieces where it stacks up. It's, I'm not asking, I'm not keeping people out of here. I'm requiring employees to come in, even if they have those symptoms that we're also familiar with. I'm putting people together with people that I know have those symptoms. That's when you're really going to start to see those challenges emerge. And just for the sake of your own workplace and productivity, I mean, these are just sort of common sense approaches, right? That you don't want to lose a significant portion of your workforce to illness. And certainly we don't want anything bad to happen to those folks because of COVID. And certainly we're all seeing the news that the Delta variant is spreading rapidly across the state of Michigan and the country for that matter, the country more than Michigan. And it's more contagious, has more challenges with it. And it's really, again, unvaccinated individuals that are at risk where vaccinated folks are not. So really, it would encourage you, it's not required, but encourage you to continue to give information to your employees about vaccinations, because that's really the ticket that is going to make all of our workplaces safe.
Great. Yeah, it's what we're all energy efficient these days, and so I hadn't moved around enough, and the lights just turned off on me. So I think if it startled you there,
yeah,
I was sitting here in the dark. I appreciate that expectation, Sean. I think it's some good insight into what to expect. I mean, it's different than before, but different, and the rules are rescinded, but that doesn't mean nothing. And so that, I like the term of common sense. Naturally, we've got some lawyers watching. They don't like the common sense. So why don't let's talk a little bit about some active things in the legislature while I've got you here. Then, there was this discussion. We've been having a discussion about unemployment. So let's switch from MIOSHA over to unemployment, which is under the same department where you're at. There was a waiver of the work search requirement for a long time. So a person is on unemployment, they're obligated to be available for and searching for work. That was waived for a while. Then it came back, but not really kind of operationalized. Then it got operationalized, but there was a bit of a conflict in the legislature with the legislature about requiring an individual to register with the Michigan Works Agency after they file for unemployment. And it sounds like maybe there's an agreement struck on this point, and perhaps we're gonna see that requirement for somebody on unemployment to register with Michigan Works. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think it's been moving through the legislature. It's Senate Bill 501, I believe is the right number, and it includes many of those provisions. My understanding at this point is that there's broad agreement with the legislation. I believe Leo is supportive of the legislation moving forward, and we expect it to move pretty quickly. So it'll kind of remedy some of those lingering questions related to the registration and how you do different things with the Michigan Works agencies. So another exciting step, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I said exciting. Let me just kind of touch back on my own. Really excited about where we're at, right? This is good news. Everything's moving forward. We still have some work to do. And this is another piece of that is it's been a trying year for you. It's been a trying year for all of the employees out there and all of us, uncharted territory, trying to navigate such a huge crisis. And, we've done well, but there's challenges. And this is one of those next pieces to get over as we move forward and kind of redeploying ourselves into our communities.
Well, I appreciate that insight. Speaking of redeploying into communities, there was also an announcement this week about opening at least some of the unemployment offices. And I think 12 of them maybe around the state. When would we expect to see that come to fruition?
I think we're going to see that in the next week or so, where we'll have some appointment times available around the state. I know that one of the things that's challenging for citizens to understand, and for all of us at times too, is the state of Michigan is an employer too. So we have all of these workplace safety protection questions and issues as well. And UIA has done a wonderful job setting up virtual appointments and other pieces. And we recognize that you know, there is a need out there for some people to need to actually be able to come in. So, but there's small staffs typically in the offices. So it's been a question they've been trying to sort out as we move forward. I think you may see some continued face coverings and other pieces there to try to manage some of these concerns, because you know, you won't know if people are vaccinated and things like that. And so you really want to mitigate and control that risk. But I think we'll be hearing some news on that in the next week or so. With getting some of those back open at least.
All right, very good. Well, thanks, Sean, for your time. I appreciate you coming on and helping us through this. To all of our members watching and listening, we're going to do a lot more thinking about this general duty obligation, what types of supports, maybe example scenarios and things that we could provide for you to think through what the future looks like as it pertains to your business and your general duty obligation in the absence of specific COVID-19 workplace safety rules. Thanks, Sean, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Brian, for having me.
All right. Well, I wanted to, we got a couple other things that I wanted to cover with you today. First thing is that we did a survey of our members. We promoted that survey right here on the small business briefing, and I want to share with you the results of that survey, or at least some key findings from the survey. Let me just skip past this here and get right into the results. So first, let's start out with just the overall business health. So we see that 78% of businesses in Michigan report that COVID-19 had a negative impact on their business. Now, we know that some businesses were just positioned well for how the world changed with respect to practices and consumer practices, and others were not. So 78% said that it had a negative impact in the year 2020. But what was a little bit more surprising and frankly disappointing was that 63% said that COVID-19 was still having a negative impact on their business. And we knew that for those businesses still restricted until just very, very recently that the impact was negative. But really, many more businesses than that are still experiencing negative impacts and ramifications. So there's still a lot of work to do in this overall recovery. We also asked businesses about their revenues. Did they go up? Had they stayed the same? Did they go down? 63%, about 2/3 of the members that we surveyed reported that they had seen a decline in their sales. So they saw their sales go down, and 34%, over 1/3, said that decline was more than 25% of total revenue. That's really big, and so we really couldn't overstate the difficulty that a business would experience or does experience when there is a loss of revenue of that amount, and so it's very, very serious. By the way, these results have been shared with officials of the state of Michigan, the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Actually unveiled them at the state's Small Business Summit just yesterday. 45% said that the pandemic created permanent changes in the way that changes in the customers that they serve. So, and that's one of the things, you know, business owners, of course, you want to control as much as you possibly can control, but the customers have changed so much. How they like to interact with you, where they're physically located, what their priorities are. So many of these things have changed very dramatically. About 16% are still struggling to pay bills as they come in. Now, on the staffing front, I think I went ahead and included the question about the Paycheck Protection Program first here, because that had a big impact on the overall ability to provide staffing. 91% of our members said that they had taken advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program. So that's a really high number, and we know that it was it was a lifeline. It was the difference between success and failure, especially for many businesses, especially in the year 2020. 52% of businesses have increased wages of their employees. Now, I want to call something out. On this previous slide, see this where I said 34% of businesses had sales decline of more than 25%, 63% saw their sales go down, and yet 52% included increased wages of their employees during the pandemic. 50% are expecting to increase the size of their workforce over the next 6 months. So there's definitely a lot of pent up energy, and business owners, entrepreneurs are going for it. So the survey results didn't show people pulling back, but rather going for it. The main problem identified, though, what's in the way? It's this one right here. The number one issue by far, we gave them 5 choices. The number one issue that is keeping them from reaching the full recovery is finding and keeping employees. It's their number one issue. When we asked what's the most important thing that that government could help with, and it came right back to this: we need more in the workforce. And of course, that ties back to some important policy issues. One of which, maybe this would be a good time to mention, that the Senate today passed a bill that would, the state Senate passed a bill that would eliminate the state's participation in the federal unemployment addition. So state plus federal unemployment support is the equivalent of $16.55 an hour today. And almost half of that is from the federal addition to the state unemployment system, and it's a deterrent from working. That's one of the things that the state of Michigan could do to impact and help with this biggest problem by far that our members cited in moving forward. And then 33% had reported that they had reduced staff over the course of the pandemic. And the final slide here is that the survey results still showed generally that business owners were optimistic in spite of all those challenges. Having revenues go down, major changes in their customers, facing a rising wage environment at a time when their revenues have been more challenged, and yet remain optimistic. And that's one thing I think that we learned throughout this whole process, and it was confirmed by this survey, is that you cannot kill the entrepreneurial spirit in our state and among business owners. So the one caveat about the survey, and we don't really have a way to correct for this, is that these are the feelings and the outcomes of those who survived this long through the pandemic. People who went out of business, who closed down their business, and there have been many. They're not answering business owner surveys anymore, and so that's an important caveat to that. The other thing is that, this would be a survey that is more tied to mature businesses, like second stage businesses. There's not a lot of startups that join and get active with statewide associations because they're just starting up their business. It tends to be more mature businesses, so it skews the outcomes a little bit more positive than what you'd see across the board. Just a couple more things that I was going to mention. The federal government has announced that they're going to extend the foreclosure and eviction moratorium one more month. So they say they're going to extend it through July 31st. It was supposed to expire on June 30th. They say that this will be the last time that they do that. But we are apparently entering one of the final stages of that particular pandemic intervention. The final thing that I wanted to mention and talk about today is that there is a tax policy change that will affect many of our members, a positive one that we think is actually has got a good shot of making it through the process. We talked about this maybe 6 weeks ago or so. It passed through the House of Representatives. It's now poised, I think, yet today it might pass in the Senate, and I've heard at least kind of off the record that that people are feeling pretty good that they've got the governor on board or more likely to sign the bill. So what this does is it allows for a pass-through business to file a separate business tax return for their business, and then whatever they pay on that tax return gets credited on their personal tax return. Because remember, all of your business taxes are paid on your personal tax return. If you're a C Corp, an S Corp, a partnership, sole proprietor, an LLC. So what this does is it allows you to file a separate tax return and then credit whatever you pay there to your personal tax return so you don't pay twice. Now, why would you want to do this? You would only want to do this if your state and local tax obligation in total exceeded $10,000, because that's the point at which on your personal tax return, you can no longer deduct it on your federal taxes. So pass-through entities where all your business taxes are paid on your personal tax return. In the past, kind of an unintended consequence of the federal reform from a few years ago was that small business owners could not deduct their full state tax liability on their federal tax return. And this, by doing it, by paying the tax separately as a business tax, as opposed to a personal tax, you will be able to deduct it on the full amount that you pay in state taxes for your business on your federal tax return. So this is the sort of thing that it will be voluntary, the way the bill is drafted. You won't have to file a separate tax return, but if you're in that category that does not get to deduct all of your state tax liability on your federal tax return, this will fix that problem. It passed the House. It passed the Senate with pretty good support, bipartisan support, not unanimous, but pretty good. And there's some indications that Treasury, and if Treasury's on board, then it means that the governor would be more likely to sign it. We will follow this one all the way through to tax forms because we think this could actually be a pretty big help to certain types of small businesses out there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Huge thank you to the Marana Group and David Roy for all the help and support in maintaining that sponsorship. We know that while the pandemic itself might be waning, that environment that we're operating in is very, very dynamic, and we expect that there'll be all kinds of things that we're going to need to talk about and work on in the future. And this community that has been built through the small business briefing is one that we're committed to maintaining over the long term. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And I'll look forward to seeing you with Rob, I think, next time on Monday.